Now we're going to have a look at changing the layout yet again, and again we're not really going to make too many changes to the HTML. This is all happening in the CSS. So these are good examples of how once you've set up the structure of your HTML correctly, it's not too hard to create completely different and unique layouts using a little bit of CSS. So here we've moved the navigation above our Mountain Life heading, and we're actually going to fix this heading so that when you scroll down the page this will stay up the top. And I've also added a few borders here to illustrate a few things. First of all, we're changing the hover effect so it has a line underneath like that, and then we're going to add another line over the top to indicate which page we're currently on. So move nav to the top of the page, fix positioning, and we're going to introduce classes so that we can show the active page, and I'll explain that later on. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is actually go to our HTML. And now if we look carefully at our HTML here, you can see that we have our H1 heading up the top in our header section, and notice I've put this BR tag in there. That's a line break tag, and that's just ensured that this life word is always on a new line after mountain. Then we've got the navigation section, which is this part here, and what we want to do is move this one down below. So that's nice and easy. If we select that line, hold down Control Shift on our keyboard and press the down arrow, you can see I can move it down one line at a time. And I'm going to move it down, and it's really important that I put it below the nav. Even if you put it here, it would be below all of our navigation buttons, but we need to have it below the navigation closing tag, and that's really important. You'll see why in a minute. Okay, so now if I go back to my live preview, you'll see that my navigation's moved up to the top, and that's just fine. But when I scroll down, it still disappears like we'd expect, like it has been doing in the past. It's pretty easy though to make it stick to the top. So let's go back to our CSS now, and we're going to go to the navigation section, which I already have a rule for up here, and I'm going to change it so that it has a new rule, position, and I'm going to make it fixed. And you see as soon as I do that, it changes our live preview a little bit. It's gone to the left edge here, and it hasn't gone across the whole width of the page. So I'm going to set it so that the top is 0, which sets it right to the top of that page that we're in, which it already was in. That's not a problem. And we're going to set the width, and this time instead of using pixels we're going to use a percentage. And if we write 100%, that ensures, as you can see over here, that our navigation section, the background, fills up the whole width of our page. And we can check that that's working. When we scroll down, you can see our navigation stays at the top and it goes over the top of everything else. But we do have an issue because this H1 heading here, we had some padding up the top, but we seem to have lost it, and that's actually gone in behind this navigation part, because when we changed it to a fixed position, it goes over the top of everything else that's there. So we can fix that quite easily by adding a little bit more margin to the top of our H1 heading. So back into our CSS, I find my H1 rule over here on the left, and if I add margin, and I'm going to use margin top, so I specify exactly the top, and I'm going to set it to 75 pixels just to illustrate what happens. And if we look over here, you can see it's moved down, and that gap there is not 75 pixels, but it's the gap from the top down to there is 75 pixels. We're going to fill up this area in the middle here when we add a bit more padding to these elements. So the next thing I want to do is get rid of this hover effect that we have over these buttons here. So I go down and find that rule, which of course is nav a hover. Now here I want to, instead of having background color going to white, I'm going to set the border, and just like we've done before, we can set a number of different properties here. The first thing we're going to specify is the width of the border. I'm going to make it 5 pixels, then I'm going to make it a solid border, and then I need to choose the color. And if I go up here, I think I'm going to choose the dark primary color as my border color. So that's this color that we have here, and it will put a line underneath up there. So let's go back down and find our hover section where we had 5 pixels solid, and let's paste in that color and put our semicolon in. Now if I go over here, you can see that our border is going in. Now there's a few interesting things to note here. If I zoom in on that, you can see when I hover over it, the text moves slightly, and also the border goes around the whole box there. Now there's a few things going on here. When we first have our HTML elements in place, there's actually no border on them. So when we hover over and we add that 5 pixel border, it moves all of the content. It's relatively easy to fix that. We just have to add an invisible border to the elements to start with. And the other reason why we've got the box around the whole section is because over here, rather than setting border bottom, I just set border. So if I change this to border bottom, you'll see now you just get a line underneath. We're still having a bit of an issue with the text flickering as we hover over that, so we can fix that by putting that invisible border on. And we're going to put it on our padding, on our nav A section here. So I'm actually just going to copy this rule here and paste it for the nav A section. And actually I'm going to change this to just border so it goes the whole way around, because I know later on I'm going to add a top border for something else. And rather than having this color, I'm going to press Ctrl E, and I can drag this slider here all the way down to the bottom. And that's our transparency. We're going to make that 0, so that means it's completely transparent and you can't see it. This has changed it to an RGBA value. You can specify your colors with hex codes like we have here. You could specify them with names like red, green, blue, and so on. Or you can specify them with RGB values, which gives you 3 different numbers that represent the intensity of red, green, and blue. And if you have RGBA, that's the 4th channel, and that's your transparency, which we've set to 0, which means it will be invisible in this case. So if we go back over here, and you can see our hover effect works a lot nicer now. There's no weird jumping around of the text, there's no borders visible at the start, and we have a line underneath when we hover over any of those elements. Now we still have this ugly white gap there, and our line at the bottom, it's going right at the edge there, and that's because in the previous video we were really careful about making sure that our padding was on the A tag, so that the background color went right to the edge of our tag there, and that there was no space beneath it. But now we actually want to have this line a little bit above the bottom there. So if we go back to our CSS, and I'm going to add in a new rule for nav li. So this is for the list items, and I'm going to put some padding. And I only want padding on the top and the bottom, so I don't want any on the left and the right. So I can use this 2-number system. Remember, the first number is the padding on the top and the bottom of our list items, and the second is the left and right of our list items. So now if we go up here, you can see that we've filled in that gap, and because we put the border on the bottom of the A tag, because we added this additional padding with the li tag, the line is part way down, not quite to the bottom, and we have that look that we're after. Finally, in this video we're going to add a line above these buttons here, our navigation elements, to identify the current page that we're on, because at the moment we're on the home page. If I switch to the About page, there's no indication on the navigation section exactly what page we're on. The way I'm going to do it here is just for demonstration purposes. It doesn't look brilliant, but it's a good way of identifying the techniques that we need to use and introducing the concept of classes. So classes are really important in HTML and CSS, and we're going to look at them more and more as we develop more complex layouts. Classes are essentially labels that we can give to any of the HTML tags that we have, and then we can use those labels in our CSS to style those labeled elements specifically. And what we're going to do here is label the button or the navigation element of the currently active page, and then we can use that in all of our HTML documents so that they're different on every page, but the styling is the same. So what I mean by that is, at the moment I've only got 2 HTML pages in my website. I've got the index.html and the about.html. And remember, these are all links to these buttons we have at the top. So this HTML page that we're looking at now is index.html. So I'm going to find the anchor tag that specifies the home button on our navigation, and in here before the closing bracket I'm going to type class equals, and I need to give it a name, and so I'm going to call it active, because this is the active page that we're looking at. So now if I go back to my CSS, I can activate that rule by putting in slightly different syntax here. So instead of just typing the name active or the name of the tag, I'm going to type a full stop and then the word active. That's the syntax we need to use if we are using a class. Everything else remains the same. So what I want to do for the active element, so that's the page that we're currently on, I want to put a border on the top, and just like before we're going to have a 5-pixel border. It's going to be solid, and I think this time I'll use the accent color that we saved up here. So I'll choose that accent color, copy it, and move down to find this .active again and paste in that color code. Now if I go to my HTML, to my live preview, sorry, you can see that we have this line up the top here. So that's exactly what we've done in this home page that we're on. We've put a class active on this home button on the anchor tag, and we've set the top border to 5 pixels and that color. Notice though that if we go to the About page, that disappears. What we want to have happen is that when we're on the About page, that line is now above here because it shows the active page that we're on. Why hasn't it shown up here? Well, if we go to our about.html, which is a whole separate document, a whole separate HTML document, notice that that class is no longer there because of course we did it on the other document, the index.html. And so to solve this problem, it's quite easy. We want to have it now, because this is the about.html page, this one here, we want to put our class name in here. So I'm going to put class equals active. Now we don't need to do anything to the CSS because we already changed that, and this HTML document is linked to the same CSS document as the first one, so it has access to that active rule that we made. And so if we look back in our live preview, because we're on the About page, we have that line above it. If I switch back to Home page, that one disappears and this one activates. I haven't made these other two pages, but hopefully you have done, so you can apply that same principle to those as well. So that's it for this video. A lot to take in, and we've covered a lot of important content. How to fix the position of an element to the top of a page. We've looked at how we can change the border properties so that we can avoid some pretty ugly effects if we happen to have a border appearing when we hover over something, so we need to solve that by putting in an invisible border to start with. We've also looked briefly at the difference between RGB, RGBA, and the hex codes and different ways of representing colors. And finally we had a very quick introduction to classes. Now the explanations we gave there were quite brief, and we will look at these concepts quite a bit more going forward because, as I say, they are really, really important. So try and get your website up to the same stage, put those link effects on all 4 pages, and in the next video we'll refine our website even further.